2 years ago, I started my YouTube journey by doing a video on Russian interference in the UK, and it seems that Channel 4 and other mainstream media outlets have finally caught up.
I know of no other example where the Prime Minister has overruled intelligence advice on the grounds of national security.
He tried to overrule, and did overrule, his security advisors and the House Lords Appointment Commission.
Boris Johnson put himself in the direct line of being able to be influenced and compromised.
Boris Johnson disregarded the Constitution, and that is a very dangerous position. I've never heard of officials seeking a meeting to discuss these issues.
Russia has clearly played a long game, has clearly tried to buy influence in the United Kingdom.
If you have politicians that can be compromised by foreign states, it could lead to sharing of secrets, it could lead to steering of policy in their interests, it could lead to a fracturing of an alliance that the West has depended on to maintain the current international order and system. And if that goes, we don't have much left.
Now, I'm not going to go into full detail as to what the documentary said. I would suggest you go onto Channel 4 and check it out for yourself. But I will be mentioning what all the secret services said.
I'm sure that Boris Johnson was warned to what the potential dangers were of having a close personal relationship with the son of a former senior Russian intelligence officer.
And it's not just the British secret services, it's going to be the Italian and Canadian you're going to hear. And I'm going to show you something that the documentary missed. And it all links to these two, Boris and Evgeny Lebedev, their relationship, and essentially whether or not Boris is compromised. You're going to be shocked. We're going to have to rewind a little bit in order to get to the truth. And so we're going to have a quick look at Alexander Lebedev and Evgeny, his son, Boris's best friend.
What Lebedev was doing in the noughties was buying a profile, buying respectability in the UK. Newspapers are the best investment of all if you want access to political elites.
Boris wanted power and Evgeny wanted influence, and Evgeny could help Boris using his father's newspapers. This is Chris Steele, a former MI6 agent, and he specialised in Russian espionage and diplomacy.
As an intelligence professional, I'm flabbergasted that a serving government minister would even consider spending a weekend in Italy in the castle that was owned by a former KGB officer who'd worked against the UK.
And it wasn't just British intelligence services that they brought onto the show. They brought on Italian MPs, as well as members of the Secret Service, with the sole focus on talking about the party that Johnson attended in Umbria, supposedly sex parties. Sex parties hosted in this mansion, which are the bread and butter of KGB espionage services. And interestingly, Dispatches misses out what was said in the report, which describes the parties as X-rated, and that it was concerning because the parties were anything goes atmosphere, which might create an environment where others could capture sex compromat on the then Foreign Secretary.
I mean, these parties seem to have been pretty decadent. I mean, lots of alcohol, of course. Yevgeny there with his pet wolfhounds, one of whom was called Boris, after Yeltsin, after Johnson, we're not quite sure.
They tried to get you drunk, they tried to get you to have sex with people, and they'll record it. And it's not just that it went to that party, it's the timing. A chemical attack had taken place on British soil, killing 1 and injuring 2, including 1 former KGB agent. The chemicals clearly came from Vladimir Putin. A NATO summit was called, Boris Johnson attended, and then he flew to Umbria to meet with Evgeny Lebedev and Alexander Lebedev. This is what an Italian MP had to say about those parties and Boris Johnson attending.
We've been given a copy of a leaked document written by Italy's Foreign Intelligence Agency to the then Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte. It's part of a wider security service investigation and was shown to members of the Italian Parliament's Intelligence Oversight Committee in 2021. MP Lia Quatapelle, the Vice President of the Italian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, is familiar with the contents of the document.
Clearly from the report, it stands out that the properties were part and tool of a network of relationship. They were part and tool of a strategy of influence. And so it was noticed who was there, how many times people went there, and so on.
The document states that Lebedev enjoys the favor and friendship of Vladimir Putin, and that he continued to attend annual KGB meetings in the Kremlin long after he left the service. Indeed, it questions whether Lebedev ever genuinely severed ties with Russian intelligence, stating his resignation from the KGB is considered by many to be unclear.
In Italy, when we say KGB, we intend the entire Russian security and spy agencies, all of them. The conclusion of the report is that it cannot be ruled out that he still works for KGB or he still is involved in KGB activities. The report says that it cannot be excluded that Lebedev today, up to date, enjoys the favor of Vladimir Putin. You should really be careful on what kind of relationship you keep with such a person.
Well, you're starting to build a picture, and I'm going to show you a little bit later on Boris Johnson implicating himself as being compromised. So you've heard from Brits and Italians. What about Canada? The man who bought 3 British newspapers and whose son sits in the House of Lords have been sanctioned by the Canadian government and held accountable and responsible in part for the invasion of Ukraine.
Alexander has some type of connection to the Kremlin and to Putin and is worthy of being sanctioned in Canada.
Dennis Molinaro worked as an analyst at Canada's Secret Intelligence Service.
I don't see there's any way that someone like Alexander, who was formerly so ingrained in the KGB, could walk away from that, especially if the Russian government could see Alexander's connections outside of the KGB as being potentially valuable. I would absolutely be thinking that those connections to intelligence services in the Russian state would still be active. It's unclear why, at the political level, nothing's been done in terms of sanctioning him.
I could think of a few. It involves parties and bags of money.
My concern would be based on Alexander's history in the UK, that he has been engaged in a level of influence operations in the UK. I see that as concerning, especially his connections to certain politicians. The threat is he could end political careers.
So where's this compromising piece that you were talking about? Well, interestingly, I'm going to show you a clip from Hillary Clinton talking about Brexit, talking about Russian interference, and how the Russia report needed to be released before the 2019 election involving Boris Johnson.
I'm dumbfounded that this government won't release the report about Russian influence, because every person who votes in this country deserves to see that report before your election happens.
Why do you think they're not releasing it?
I don't know the answer to that. I would think a reporter like you and others should be absolutely relentless in trying to get to the bottom of it. Because, look, we know from even this current Trump administration's intelligence officials that the Russians are still in our electoral system. There's no doubt of the role that Russia played in our 2016 election and is continuing to play. There's a lot of evidence that Russia played in the Brexit election. Now, I'm not, in your country. I don't have a say about any of that. But the fact that the current government won't release this report by your own government should raise some questions.
So in the build-up to the election, what was Boris Johnson saying about the Russia report and Russian interference? Bear in mind everything that you've watched, showing Boris has been continually bombarded with information from secret services, suggesting that Evgeny and Alexander Lebedev aren't the right sort of people to be giving peerages to. Plus, the report has been on his desk since October, and it's now November.
Absolutely no evidence that I've ever seen of any Russian interference in UK democratic processes. And
there's still one more clip to show you, but none of these clips were shown on the Channel 4 documentary. The report itself did show interference. He is clearly lying to the public, and the question is why. The next clip is on the 22nd of November, and Boris compares Russian interference to that of the Bermuda Triangle.
Whether or not there was Russian interference or any kind of influence.
There is absolutely no evidence that I know
If that's the case, then why not release it?
To show any interference in any British electoral event.
Why the documentary didn't bring that up, I don't know, but it does bring up a question of whether or not Boris has been compromised to a certain level. What I also can't understand is why has he gone full force into supporting Ukraine if he was compromised. However, if this was brought into court, I'm pretty sure most juries would convict Boris of treason, because quite frankly, it's shown that there's a level of compromise, and he's lied about Russian interference. If you've come this far, you should watch my movie, Putin's Interference in Britain's Politics. Link in the description, comments, and at the end of this video. But on a more cheerful note, I'd like to say thank you to all of my supporters, all of my subscribers, and everyone that donates to the channel. It helps it grow and keep on going. So thank you. Thanks once again, and bye for now.